Is eviction moratorium really that bad, or are things going to work out? Is it just the right complaining about it for no reason, or are there legitimate reasons for why that might not work out as well? So today we're going to look at other countries and big city experiences of regulated tenant-landlord relationships and how it worked out at the end. And since it's very sunny today, I'm just going to wear some glasses. So, in this video, I'm going to talk to you about experiences of Venezuela, Germany, and New York City, and what happened in those markets after they became heavily regulated. I am not the person who will be talking to you about socialism is bad or landlords are the worst people on the planet. Today, we're just going to take this observational, historic approach, and we're going to look at what happened. Please like and subscribe my video and subscribe to my channel because it really gives me incredible motivation to create. And we're gonna dive in right away. So the reason that I want to talk to you about this today is because there is legislature that's brewing in the Congress as part of the CARES Act and just some other thoughts out there about an attempt to regulate landlord-tenant relationship. And so the first country that I wanted to talk to you about is Venezuela. So in Venezuela, around 2010, 2011, they realized that there's a shortage of about 3 million apartments, rental apartments, and they decided to make a change. And what they did was they restricted what landlords could do. And basically right now, 10 years later, it's basically impossible to evict anyone out of your apartments. And practically you lose rights to your property once you rent this out. And these days, as opposed to like 10 years ago, if 10 years ago about 30% of all housing options were rentals, right now only 1% of all housing options are rentals in the country because nobody wants to rent out, mainly because of that regulation that made it impossible to remove tenants. And that makes sense because who would want to lose their property rights outright? And if a lot of landlords, normally at least half of landlords in most countries are small-time landlords, so maybe that's their second home, maybe it's like their third or fourth home, but they usually don't own more than 10 units, and they definitely don't want to lose that. It's just too much. It's like a huge piece of their assets that they lose in case they rent out, so they just don't. Do you follow me so far? If you do, let me know in the comments down below. So another example is Germany. So Germany is one of the most regulated markets in Europe, and things are particularly heavily regulated in Berlin. It's like that all over Europe, but in Germany in particular, you can't really evict anyone unless they stop paying or damage the property or some other very legitimate reason like that. But you can't just evict anybody just because. So what that did in Germany was that the landlords became very picky, because if back in the day they could just give a chance to anyone, because if the things won't work out, they would just remove them from their property. Right now, they really need to make a very good choice because they need to make sure that people are good people and they're reliable people. So what that does, that actually limits the choices and it limits the opportunities for people who are unemployed, immigrants, people with kids, basically anything that can potentially make it complicated for a landlord, like make this relationship a little bit more complicated in the future. It just disqualifies those people, that regulation. And what it did was also it drove prices, particularly in Berlin, very high up. Right now, between 2017 and 2018, the prices increased by, I believe, more than 20%. And then over the past decade, over the past 10, 12 years, in Berlin, rental prices increased by over 100%, which is totally crazy. And it just really, there was no good reason for that. It's not like the properties got better, or they were not better maintained, they were not renovated. It's just because it's so hard. That relationship between landlord and tenant is so regulated by the government that it's just, the landlords want to protect themselves by maybe charging more. So then if things go wrong, they at least have this cushion. And so moving on, let's go back to New York City. And I'm obviously from Long Island, and I've been renting there, and I'm familiar with that market. So what is going on in New York City is that a lot of apartments that are rent controlled or rent stabilized, about 1 million of apartments in New York City have some sort of regulation. So, and 20,000 of them are rent controlled. That means that the landlord cannot really increase the price, and they cannot evict the person. What is more crazy, it's the craziest thing, is that people can actually inherit the rights to live in the property. So basically you lose your rights to the property as well. And then in some cases, people can even sublease your apartment, which means they're going to make money on something that belongs to you, just because then you can't. But you have to maintain the apartment complex, you have to make all the repairs, you basically have to subsidize their life. And so what that does in New York City is also that there are a lot of apartment complexes where some people live and pay the market price, and others just pay the stabilized price. So some people can pay $3,000 for a one-bedroom apartment in Upper West Side, and in the same apartment building, there can be people who pay only $1,000 for the same apartment. So on average, they still pay $2,000, which doesn't seem too bad. But then the person who pays $3,000 subsidizes the one who pays $1,000, and it just creates this toxic environment in apartment buildings and just for young people, because they're basically being driven out of the city. A lot of my friends, quite a few of my friends lived in apartments like that, and it's very dividing, and it's not helping anyone, because there was also quite a few studies done that looked at who lives in those rent stabilized apartments and who benefits from them. And what they found is that the wealthier, older people and white people mostly benefit from rent control and rent stabilization, which doesn't make sense. And they found that a lot of lawyers, surgeons, fashion designers, and whoever, like people who make a lot of money, live in those rent-controlled apartments frequently. And over the 90s and early 2000s, they were deregulating that a lot. But back, like last year in 2019, though, they kind of reverted a lot of those deregulatory efforts back. For instance, like in the 90s or in 2000s, they tried to make it so that once the tenant's income reaches over $200,000 a year, they can no longer qualify for rent-stabilized apartment. They have to pay market price. And in 2019, last year, they canceled that rule. So now it doesn't matter how much money you make, you can still qualify for rent-stabilized apartment, which to me makes no sense. Again, like the whole thing was trying to help people who cannot afford things, and now it doesn't matter. So yeah, let me know what you think. What do you guys think? Do you think this whole eviction moratorium and cancel rent movement are going to change the tenant-landlord relationship? Do you think it's time to change, or do you think it might lead to, just increase in prices and the lack of rental apartments in the future? Personally, as a landlord, I would probably I'm not going to do one-year contracts anymore. I'm probably going to do month to month. So if things start changing, if legislature changes, I'm just not going to put my units onto the market, because I don't want to lose my property. So as a landlord, I obviously think about those things, and I have a few units. I have 4 units that I rent out, and these legislative efforts really changed the way I think about my rental properties, about the prices, and about whether I'm going to put them on the market in the future. So it is very likely consequence that, people like me, just like smaller landlords, are going to stop renting out, because I don't want to lose, like the last thing I want to do is lose my property. I'd rather lose on some rental income, but I'm not going to subsidize somebody else living in my property that I need to take care of. Yeah. Please like and subscribe. It gives me incredible motivation to create. Let me know what kind of videos do you want to watch, and let me know if the eviction moratorium or cancel rent movement are going to change the relationship, or do you think that maybe it's just all going to go back to normal after the quarantine is over? Let me know in the comments down below.